Katana Zero is a 2019 indie action game with some of the year's most innovative storytelling. What makes Katana Zero so innovative is its perfectly aligned intersection of game mechanics, world, and story. We'll be looking at the basics of the game, including its mechanics and level structure, then how these work together to enhance the storytelling, and finally some examples of the great heights achieved. Katana Zero starts dramatically in the midst of a level, and without any formal tutorial, instead dropping the player into the action with some key prompts to guide them. This forms a great hook, getting players involved with the world from the outset. However, it's so sudden it causes a little confusion, missing a sense of where they are. This feeling ends up being important to the story that's revealed. After the intro level, the structure of the levels reveals itself, where the protagonist Zero goes home after each level to sleep. Then the next morning he goes to a psychologist appointment and receives his mysterious medicine and his next mission briefing. These moments bookend each level and give a good space for the story to be delivered without the intrusion of gameplay, and provided a much needed relaxing of pace in an otherwise energetic action game. The true brilliance of this structure, however, is its subversion. It only lasts in this form long enough for players to get used to it. In the 5th level, Studio 51, the morning psych appointment is postponed to the next day, so Zero takes to the streets to head home before being intercepted by a limousine. This is a total break from the normal routine the game has followed up to this point. It's where players see how much larger a possibility space is afforded by a little liberty with the game rules. Zero has a conversation with the passenger of the limousine, V, which ends in confrontation and Zero's ejection from the vehicle. Zero pursues the limousine to its destination and the level begins there, trying to get some revenge and some answers. Without the guidance of the psychiatrist and his instructions, Zero and the player are able to see much more of the world, and things the psychologist would prefer unseen. If they'd been strictly following orders, Zero and the player would learn almost as much here as they had over the previous duration of the game. The general layout of the levels involving therapy sessions, levels of action, and returning to the apartment stays for the rest of the game, but now it's free to be bent and warped to the benefit of the story, which most often means dodging therapy and the instruction that comes with it. The most important game mechanics in Katana Zero are precognition and time dilation. The actual gameplay is not how things really happen, but our precognizant vision or experimentation of how things could play out. It is the means by which Zero is able to achieve such perfect swordsmanship and complete every encounter without a scratch. It's like Groundhog Day, but at most repeating 5 minutes at a time, not a whole day. While in this stage of developing a successful route, time can also be slowed to allow for more technical and difficult maneuvers, such as deflecting a bullet with a sword or rolling at a perfect time. Once the player has found a successful route through the stage, they are presented with a grey static video replay of the stage. This replay is an objective videotaped recording of events, and perhaps the only reliable narrator in the game. Diegetically, the precognition and time dilation are manifestations of Zero's altered perception of time, and effects of his Chronos prescription. Similarly, the Chronos functions as a diegetic explanation for the in-world cuts. They're errant time skips, an adverse side effect of the drug. Zero's memory loss might also be attributable to the adverse side effects of Chronos, with the psychiatrist carefully controlling the dosage to keep him in a psychologically vulnerable but physically powerful state. The memory loss also has another important effect outside of the world of the text. It acts as a more subtle and complex version of the amnesiac protagonist trope. The purpose of this trope is to make the discovery of the world happen at the same time and rate for both the audience and the characters. Linking the experiences of the audience and character works so well to create an emotional resonance, and games are especially effective at creating this resonance because there's already the mechanical link between the experiences of the two parties. Katana Zero does an especially good job of using this amnesiac convention by not starting Zero off as a completely lost amnesiac, but rather having him mindlessly following his routine. It's like he's woken up from the days of his daily grind, as radical as it is. The game also does a good job of showing the routine to the player by using it as the level structure and slowly breaking it apart as Zero and the player both wise up to it. There are two more important systems working towards the quality of the storytelling: the text effects and the dialogue system. Words are animated in their text boxes, with vibrations, oscillations, and colourful fills. There are also effects to dramatize delivery, like red, bold text accompanied by pounding sound effects to emphasize yelling and anger. Interrupting someone while they speak will cause their words to spill out across the room and drop out of consciousness like the lost phonemes they are. This system is so much more potent than the usual text crawl that has been the standard for games. The use of colour fills for nouns is less impressive, however, although it does help to subconsciously make the connection between certain items in dialogue. These text effects make full use of the digital medium. Where film can use close-up shots, emotional deliveries and expressions, and books are limited by their print medium but supplemented by their surrounding passages, games especially in this style aren't afforded those privileges nor the same limitations. Katana Zero breaks out of the limitations of text, and without appropriating cinematic tools, brings itself much closer to an artistic medium. It occupies a space adjacent to film or literature, but a high-level artistic space nonetheless. Working hand in hand with the text effects is the brilliant dialogue system. While in conversation a bar will fill as you're being spoken to. Once it reaches the threshold, they finish speaking and you have the remaining time to reply. You're given up to 3 responses to choose from, which can lead the conversation in different directions. If, however, you want, you can interrupt them while they're still speaking and throw them off. This gives the dialogue a good flow and responsiveness, and there is a much more tangible feeling to the root act of skipping through dialogue. This is fair too, because everyone is concisely written and what they say has a great importance in the relatively short game with an expansive plot. The dialogue system also does a great job in creating a breadth of possibilities, while still landing the plot in the same places so that it can always follow the same trajectory across any permutation. This doesn't mean that what you choose to say is meaningless, not at all. Reaching alternative endings or secrets is done as much by well-chosen dialogue as by special gameplay. There are 2 linked scenes, for instance, both conversations with the receptionist that can go in at least 3 meaningful ways. The first time you meet her, you need to get into the building she works in. You can deceive her into letting you in, piss her off until she storms out, or really engage with her and become amiable. Any of these outcomes puts you past her and into the mission, but they have consequences later on. You meet her again at a different reception job. She'll either remember you somewhat from before, have been killed off for being a witness, or remember you fondly depending on which of the respective decisions you made earlier in the game. If you have the good relationship with her, you can end up playing a game with her and share a special moment. In any case, the outcome is the same. You start both levels and they play out the same. These decisions don't have a big impact on the gameplay, but they're important for roleplay and integral to the connection the player and Zero build. The dialogue isn't authoritative over the gameplay. It's enriching, it's weighty but not lethargic. Katana Zero develops some effective characters to tell its story through, and for these mechanics to be used by. V, for instance, is built up over several encounters to be an unlikable antagonist, but with some depth and humanity too. He appears briefly several times, building up his adversarial character. When we finally encounter him, he presents himself as somewhat personable before relations break down. He's also an extremely violent man, but with the degree of personality he has outside of that, he functions to raise a mirror to our own players' violence. The antagonism between V and Zero is really only there because of how they meet. We don't meet V understanding his motives, but the same is true of ourselves. We're just following orders, and from someone we don't like at that. We know his violent acts are bad, but what of our own? Does their government sanctity mean all that much? Defeating V down the line is impactful because he's so much more than a nameless goon. He's human, and seeing him get sliced up is affecting. He's not so unlike ourselves. The little girl is another character which is important to the game's impactfulness. She represents innocence and the need for protection, which strongly juxtaposes against the violence and assault of the rest of the game. Her existence acts to give weight to Zero's life and a new axis to redefine himself from. It gives him humanity as he wakes up from the days of his routine and pulls himself away from a life of exclusive violence. Her purpose is perhaps too transparent, however. The vulnerable girl in need of protection is a trope worn thin, and her design doesn't have a degree of subtlety about it. It's clear something bad will happen to her, and when it finally does, its impact is diminished because it was so predictable. Her character serves a purpose in the game that it would be detrimental to omit, but it's trite. It's one of the few aspects where the game fails to innovate. The psychiatrist is another important character. He's very unpleasant in his dealings with Zero, but still they regularly meet. He represents authority and acts as an interface between Zero and strong anonymous forces. The framing as a therapist and medicator makes it seem like he's there to help Zero with his nightmares and issues, but really he's got no interest in that. He's just Zero's handler, acting to placate him and give him orders. Zero too is a good character. His simple design and memory loss make him a great vessel for players to take in the world and story. He's got a good visual design that supports the gameplay, but he's not too complex or over-designed either. He has a personality and conversation, but not too strong to prevent your own interpretation and roleplay. His arc over the game is well suited and makes full use of the player-protagonist bond. There's a scene at the end of the 6th level, mentioned Hideout, that perfectly uses all the elements discussed above to culminate into a fantastic and powerful moment. It uses a clever subversion of the level structure, makes full use of the precognition mechanic for narrative purposes, and uses text effects, the dialogue system, and characters to achieve its tremendous high. Deep into the mansion, you start a screen as usual and use your precognition to figure out your path through it. Once you finish the level and watch the video replay, a door explodes when you run through it. The precognition failed to anticipate this, and it makes Zero completely unprepared and vulnerable. Afterwards, Zero wakes up tied to a chair, being interrogated by V. V beats and questions Zero until eventually shooting him, but Zero wakes up at the start of the interrogation again, retaining all he's learned through the previous sequence. Here the precognition is being applied to the dialogue system, and they work seamlessly together. As the cycle repeats, Zero and the player learn more about V and uncover what's going on. Eventually V says he's late for a date, so at the start of the next sequence, Zero makes fun of him for it. This clues V into the fact you're already on Chronos, the powerful drug that grants the precognition abilities that he's searching for. The interrogation ends when Zero is able to get inside V's head and psych him out, and he leaves you to his executioner. This boss fight is very satisfying because it's a good package of action after a tense scene of dialogue, and the die and retry cycle is so quick that it's not punishing, and again, you're always learning the best way to get through the encounter. It's a fast and violent encounter which lets out all the energy and anticipation built up during the interrogation. These scenes work so well together because they come at a point when the player has finally got a cemented understanding how each of the individual mechanics work, and it brings them all together in a beautiful confluence, showing how strong these mechanics are for storytelling when used together. The booby-trap door comes as a surprise and a subversion of the precognition, then the interrogation again uses the precognition in a new way, but one that's instantly understandable. It creates a scene with the player and their avatar equally disoriented. They piece together what's happening at the same rate, sharing in the experience in a way that only games can deliver. The scene also makes full use of text effects to convey the verbal violence of the interrogation. The boss fight that follows is an extremely tight fight too. It fits perfectly with the pacing of the scene. Everything here works so well together, and the transition of using precognition for gameplay into dialogue and back into gameplay is so smooth you'd be forgiven for not noticing it. Towards the end of the game, a lot has been learnt about Zero's past. We can infer that in the 7 or so years between the war and the start of the game, Zero lost most of his memory and faded into a waking slumber where he just followed his routine and his orders. In this period, it seems like he learned to redefine himself based on his easily read attributes and affordances. Being a katana-wielding assassin, at some point this became the foundation for his understanding of self, not his memories. This explains all the feudal Japanese memorabilia in his apartment and his love of Japanese film. It was reassuring to him, it gave him a way to know himself. It's similar to how the player starts off the game a bit disoriented, maybe confused and only having the immediate obvious elements to understand Zero from. He's built up a facade that fooled even himself. This constructed persona comes apart at the end of the game, when Zero realizes that his nightmares weren't fictitious, but his haunting wartime memories resurfacing. The young girl was crucial in his personal development and let his memories come back to him. Without her, he would not have been able to develop the empathy towards children that brings his memories back. His memories throw a radically different light onto the story. Zero is not a new actor in the world. He's always been an instrumental part of all the things that have happened throughout the war and the contemporary Kronos conflict. This also brings the role of the psychiatrist into question. He took interest in the dreams, but misled Zero while knowing full well their meaning. This brings a powerful culmination to their toxic relationship. We've already learned to hate this character, but respect his benevolent purpose, but now it seems like he was entirely malicious the whole time. This comes to a head in which Zero and the psychiatrist fight, ending with Zero bludgeoning him to death. A cruel and painful ending that will have you questioning who has the moral superiority. This ties up the main thread of the story, and things can't continue as they did before from this point. Zero is broken completely free of his shackles, and all because he learnt who he really was. Katana Zero manages to be a hugely innovative game by way of entwining worlds, storytelling and game mechanics into a seamless and cohesive whole. Every aspect of the game ties into another to reinforce into a robust experience. Precognition is a fantastic way to diegetically explain the game mechanics as well as enriching the gameplay and story immensely. The pacing is solid, the decomposition of the level structure opens the world up to far more possibilities while retaining a logical structure. The text effects and dialogue systems work beautifully together and supplement the loss of details and subtlety that the graphic style brings. These systems all function together to create great moments in the narrative and to find good characters for those moments to play out through. Innovation is plentiful in this game, and it will be great to see where its influences will emerge, and what the folks at ASCIIsoft will create next, and how the story finally concludes in the upcoming updates.